Martelli,
Here.
and Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
All right, great. Now let's do the pledge. I pledge
Allegiance
To the flag
flag
of the United States of America,
to the republic
for which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands,
one
one
nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
liberty,
and justice for all.
All right. Thank you. All yours, Chuck.
I apologize. I just got in from on the road, so I apologize. I was just going to bring up the agenda from our net. I think it's probably there. Make sure we stay on track here with you guys. We're doing a determination. Oh, you guys had to do determination of a chair, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that Renee was, I'm a little fuzzy on this. Renee, were you appointed chair?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can dispense with that because that's already been taken care of. That was quick. On to the next.
Next one. That discussion of charge and process. Next item.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was having some issues with audio. Yeah, so the charging process, the purpose of this committee is to meet weekly with colliers and help them and guide them as they work through the development of options. So it's basically a rapid action team that will help them steer in the right direction. And at the same time, it is our responsibility to take the conversations discussed in this meeting and go back, talk to other committee members and community members and stakeholders and make sure that the opinions that we're providing colliers are informed opinions and so that they can move forward in an expedited manner. Any questions on that?
Nope.
All
Makes
right.
sense.
All right. So with that, Chuck, I think we'll follow your lead here.
Okay, if the members don't mind, I was just going to maybe slide through our presentation quickly with Malone just to get them caught up to speed on some of the discussions, if you guys don't mind with that. So Mike, Rebecca, you guys, this will be nothing really new for you. I don't know if Mike's back, but Rebecca, nothing will be surprising, I don't think, here for you. So what we did is we utilized, we talked about some of the considerations that we'll keep in mind as we're developing some of the scenarios and being, keep it data driven, a holistic approach to the district as the state of Connecticut asked us to do, and for their recommendations, based upon your capacity and utilization analysis. It's appearing that the physical square foot needs specifically to the elementary schools are probably the priority versus the physical conditions, at least in the initial thought process. But certainly the physical conditions needs will definitely be part of it. But the initial data is kind of indicating that, keyword being initial scenarios here. Kind of highlighted those. But again, ultimately, that prioritization of the scenarios and the projects within the scenarios, the timelines are certainly up to the full school modernization committee for that. How do we evaluate the needs? So basically, we brought up your lovely chart here from Chapman as an example here, and we're talking about the full capacity, and we're kind of using this term functional capacity or target capacity of 90% of that, Rebecca, which you guys are fully aware of. There for each of the schools is one of our factors. The other one is utilizing the enrollments that your team put together to, as we're looking at each school, evaluating, is it currently right size for the projected enrollment, or is it undersized or oversized? So that'll come into play in combination with the capacity analysis as well. For that, in calculating the ratio, looking at the 8-year enrollment versus that functional capacity, and essentially asking, are we going to have more students than we can accommodate in the school? And it's pretty interesting, the data that came out of your numbers and Malone's work, the way we saw it. And then again, comparing the space standards against those ratios and capacities, and seeing what they tell us as we proceed. So again, this is all your stuff up here, Rebecca. I made sure to get your logo in there, give you guys credit for that. But what we're seeing at the elementary school level, it's pretty. I think these graphs are pretty straightforward. But the four that really pop out at us graphically is Darcy, Chapman, Highland, in Norton, with Doolittle kind of being on the cusp right at that 100%, 545 and 552. We're right there, which, and it's in the farther out years from here. So you keep it in mind, but it's not like the others here for that ratio. So essentially what it's saying to us is elementary schools, need additional space. Looking at the middle school and the high school, those appear to have adequate capacity as they are right now, with Dodd being 7 and 8 and Cheshire, being 9 through 12. So from a physical space need, those appear to be have enough square footage, if you will. So what we did, Rebecca, is we looked at we did a chart on that comparison, and we first looked at the space standard calculations and said, okay, for the projected 8-year enrollment as is from your charts, where do the buildings compare to their existing square foot size? And in column D is the ratio of the space standard for the 8-year projected enrollment compared to what they have for their existing size. So basically, column D is C divided by B in that ratio. So if it's over 100%, it's basically saying that for the future need, we could expand. We have a need for additional room according to the space standard. And again, this is how the state of Connecticut evaluates the size of the schools, the educational specifications in the program. And this is what they're going to look at. If you were to submit a grant application to the state, first page, CASA's probably going to open is going right to the space standard. And he's going to want to know what that is. Because if it's under 90%, they're going to question the project. They like to see it what they call right sized, appropriately sized. And that's a somewhat subjective discussion. But what's interesting is we're showing Chapman, Norton, Highland, from the elementary schools needing space in the future, and for the space standard, and Dodd Middle School potentially, that's close to 100%. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then we looked at the space standard in column D and compared it to the analysis using the 90% functional capacity for each school versus the 8-year enrollment in column A, basically saying, okay, we're saying we could hold X amount of students, how many we're going to have from a seat perspective. And what's interesting is, these are the two columns we're comparing here. And you can see, Chapman's 114, the utilization percentage is 122. So those are both, kind of tying together. Norton's 117, 118, and these aren't always one-to-one ratios, but the space standard enrollment is kind of tying with the capacities that we're talking about. And the state of Connecticut doesn't necessarily, again, look at utilization as capacity as much as they do the space standard. For that, Highland is up there as well. Dodd, which is on the space standard, they're more around 90% for the utilization. So this one's really close to right size, and that's an anomaly there. But essentially, we want to look at these ratios and are they telling the same story? Are they correlating? So we did, Rebecca, we just basically say from a capacity need, Darcy, Chapman, Highland, and Norton from a capacity are going to be exceeded. And then which ones per space standard are going to require more room or indicate require more room. Chapman, Highland, Norton, and Dodd. And of those, there's 3 schools that are kind of aligning a bit, and indicating. It's not a one-to-one. We weren't saying, Rebecca, that one is necessarily correlates to the other, but to show there's some consistencies with these of, hey, your utilization and your space standard with the state, it kind of helps, again, looking at the data and are they aligning a little bit? And it's not a perfect one-to-one, with that for it. So, but it's telling us the elementary schools need room, and they're aligning together. Not always the case, where Darcy is just a function of the space standard for that in the program.
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would it be useful to look at this again and look at Doolittle if Doolittle had kindergarten within the building?
So we did look at, I think we did in one of the analysis that we're going to look at.
Okay.
In the space standard, Rebecca, in one of the options, we did take the K programs, and we'll bring that up. We did take the K numbers and add it into there. So if we expanded it K to 6, what would that look like? But yeah, absolutely. No, we're thinking on the same page for sure with that. But definitely, because I think that's going to eventually happen. Then we kind of talked about our options, Rebecca, like what are the things we can do to alleviate that stress? Not all these are applicable, but these are some of the solutions we've seen around the state. Redistricting. I don't, from our perspective, all the schools are stressed. I don't think redistricting is going to help at all in Cheshire, because they're all pretty high, pretty well stressed in a capacity. Combination of additions and renovations to the existing schools. Depends on the property, the physical constraints and the models they want to look at. So some of the sites might be tighter. Additions, renovations, and potential redistricting. Those additions have to be pretty large probably in order to do that. So I don't know if we have the physical land available is my guess. We can look at that. Number 4 is combination of new, renovating, redistricting / closing. This is kind of probably where we're going to land. Is some kind of combination number 4. And then the other one is if we increase the class sizes. I think in your capacity analysis, you noted 20 to 21 students per classroom. Mm-hmm. So, if that got bumped up to 24 or 25 students, obviously that would release some, but I don't suspect that it would resolve the problem overall in the district. I don't think it would make that much of a dent in increasing capacity if I was to take a guess at that. So these are just different options. So again, we went back and we said, okay, what are the considerations, the data-driven, the holistic approach to this footage needs? Now we throw in the requirements when we're talking renovations. The state of Connecticut has specific requirements for renovation status, and one of those, besides going through the hoops of looking at the structural analysis, the physical conditions of the space, is the space standard and ensuring is that building right size. Because if a building is way oversized, you're not going to cut parts of a building off to bring it back down to the space standard. If that ratio is below 90%, which means you're bigger than what you need, that becomes a difficult conversation, not a difficult conversation, but a conversation with the state to justify that additional square foot and renovating that for it. Again, land available for any additions or a build new option, and then bringing back in the physical plant needs. We'll eventually have to wrap those back in, looking at the high school and Chapman and Humiston for those. So again, these are just kind of scenarios we're trying to frame it for all the committee members and the community of what are the things as the consultants, you guys and us, things that we've considered in our projects and our scenarios when we're going through. And I'm sure there's probably a few others that you guys can add to that as well, to the mix. I mean, there's programmatic needs and stuff, but these are some of the high level ones that we'll keep in front of us. So scenario one, and this is probably the meat of it here, is the question that we had. I think we talked in our in an off meeting, Rebecca, is with the schools, the elementary schools being stressed, how can we resolve that need just within the elementary schools themselves without the prior studies were the middle school, and that seems to have taken on a narrative of its own. And this option, building a new elementary school, that would be, we could size it. We estimated 600 to 700, but that's obviously where we need Malone, your team to help. Hey, what's that sweet spot for a new school that would help alleviate the stress in the other schools, potentially where we would close probably Chapman because of the physical condition, but also potentially house pre-K into there and close Darcy, or one of the options that came up, Rebecca, in the meeting was moving Humiston to Darcy and repurposing Darcy as a central office and the alternative high school. So that's a option we need to add to this mixes, and that was pretty predominant, I think, in our conversations on Monday night. I think that was a great suggestion there. But we're roughly, we're saying if it was 600 to 700 students, it might be 750 again. We're, depending on where the district lines are drawn, right? And you guys do your thing and go on what's the right size of that school. We estimate that school would be roughly 75,000 to 90,000 square feet. And again, these are ranges. For that, probably in that northern portion of Cheshire, where you have the big northwest part of Highland that's up there, right? And when we're looking at the map, and I think, let's see, just want to bring that up. Just going to bring that map up, and you've already seen it, Rebecca. Nothing new for you.
Chuck, can I just ask a quick question here?
Of course, absolutely.
The right sizing of the building, obviously, we're relatively new into the whole COVID situation here. And I think time will tell if the state will be a little bit more flexible in terms of room sizing, given, the current circumstances. We obviously don't want rooms that are too tight. But the other thing is, if we build beyond square footage, would that mean that would just be at our own expense, or do you jeopardize the whole cost at that point? So, do you get reimbursed on X square footage? Anything beyond that, you pay 100% on? Just so we know what the options are.
Yeah. So when we're looking at that, there's a couple dynamics there. So previously, years ago, the way it worked and the space standard, the ratio years ago would be, if you wanted to overbuild, and I'll use simple numbers there. So if your space standard was 90,000 square feet for a certain enrollment, and you wanted to build 100,000 square feet, the way, and this is really the space standard drives reimbursement. Right. We use it as, so what they'll take is that 90%, right? 90 divided by 100. And they would take the 90% and apply that ratio to your reimbursement rate. So if your reimbursement rate is 50%, it's now reduced down to 45%.
Yeah, okay.
And that's technically how it's calculated. It's not like, okay, you're going to pay for the 10,000 square feet. It's a reduction of your reimbursement rate.
Okay.
But the problem, what was happening over the years up until the last couple, and this is why if you were to look at the priority lists from early 2010s up to maybe 2014, 15. And then the last couple of years, you're going to see it's going from 900 million down to 6, 7, $500 million. And that's where the concept or the perception that the state is cutting back on funding. It's not that they're cutting back on funding. What has happened in those higher years, districts were submitting grant applications for projects. I'll use East Hampton High School for an example, because we worked on it. They submitted, and I think the space standard for that one, I want to say it was like close to 100,000 square feet. The building itself was 125,000 square feet. So that in itself was a pretty good, bump in square footage, if you will. Basically 80% if I got my ratio right. And what schools, that office, and this was pre-Costa, would go, okay, fine, here you go. They would pass it through, it would go on the list. They'd get their grant commitment. And then what was happening is districts were submitting notwithstanding legislation for one, a space waiver. They basically said, instead of the 100,000, we want 125,000. And when all the legislators get together on that bill, none of them are going to vote it down. They're all in it together. They're like, if you vote against my district, I'm going to vote against yours. So they all got put in. So now you have a building that's oversized, that's being paid for partially by the state or whatever rate, and then the district. So once you have a grant commitment, it's now law. OSCGR can't take it off. Once it's on the priority list, they can't take it off, essentially. It's done. So December 15th, any of those projects are going to be on the list. And then the second part of the legislation was renovation status. So if Oscar said, no, we're not going to grant you legislative or administratively renovation status, they say, fine, we're going to go and put notwithstanding legislation. So now the costs of the project have gone up because nobody in that office ever checked the project to see if it was right size. And this is kind of where it comes, and it's kind of a long story, but that's the history of where they've gotten to now, is that they're trying to control the costs and basically say, if we get a grant application for a project that's in the space standard ratio, they kind of use 90, 92%. They're going to test it and go, we need to have a discussion. Why do you need a building that's larger? And a lot of times we've justified it. We've drafted space standard waivers to Costa Net office, and they've been granted because of special programs. In the district, you may have a special unique need in Cheshire that would justify being higher than, we're going to build a program and go, we have so many, kindergarten, pre-K, here's our, how many kids per room. And we're going to do the whole program and to justify the size of that building. And now to kind of come back to your original question, technically, yes, you would pay for the additional, but if you can justify it programmatically for the vision of the district and what you're trying to achieve, and we've shown that we've looked at it holistically in the grand scheme of the district, they can provide us a space waiver for a school and maintain that 100% reimbursement rate. So, explanation.
Yeah, I mean, CDC health standards are one of the areas that I'm, just conscious of, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure nobody's broached that already with DAS, but just a thought.
Yeah, and those are definitely things that we're going to need to justify if we do a space standard calculation, say on a new school, right? And we say it's 75,000 square foot, but our program and the educational specification is saying we need 85,000 square feet. Well, we're going to have to really prove that to them. They're gonna push back on us. Michelle Dixon will push back. Costa will, Bob Selmer or Kermit. They're going to go, why do you need more? Because the state is, they're in this budget crunch and they're in a deficit. And this is only, school construction is, probably just a small part of it, but they want to be able, when they put you on the priority list, to say, we reviewed it, vetted it, it's justified, and it needs to go on the priority list. And also, what is good for the district from the district side, and John and I just went through this for a renovation status, is that you want to know ahead of time before you start designing and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars into design and ultimately construction. If we're overbuilding and we want to know if we're going to get a space waiver or not, so we can do the estimated reimbursement. But also for new construction, it's new construction. But if we're doing, say, a renovation, additional renovation, are we going to achieve renovation status? Because they typically won't give you renovation status without a space waiver. Those kind of go hand in hand. If you need a space waiver, you have to have the space waiver typically to get it, from what my experience. So bottom line is the answer is correct, but there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not you get 100% reimbursement or not. It's not a black and white discussion anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry for the lengthy explanation, but it does help when we get to that point. You know, hopefully in January when we're getting down to these, everything we're looking at, they're going to test us on. Michelle's going to test. They'll go, why do you need a brand new school? You know, that's what you select. You know, why are we doing this? And so we're going to have to walk them through our thought process. And if it makes sense to them, then they can justify the program. Then we're in a better position. And if we understand their needs and understand their restrictions, in my experience, that's helped us with that office to support the program.
Yeah, hence the benefit of a long-range plan.
Absolutely, 100%. They love, Michelle Dixon likes long-range plans. She loves those. She'll tell you that. She's like, oh, this is what I want to see. And so, you know, so this Northern District, you know, right, this is kind of what we're, you know, if you take the Chapman line, almost kind of extend it over to the west, almost this area up here, Rebecca, something along those lines, you know, and they may get massaged a bit with the Highland.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you guys have, you know, how much you guys have got to dive into it yet, but, you know,
And I just have one question that kind of ties into the maximizing the programming of a building. Are we wedded to a centralized pre-K? And are we wedded to it being continuing at Darcy, especially if there's a contemplated use of Darcy for Humiston uses right now?
So for that part, I think the discussion was just taking pre-K potentially if it was moved in one location, Ben, I think maybe to the new school, but as far as maybe distributing, that's certainly in a district, I think.
And not necessarily, and I'm not thinking necessarily in all buildings, but maybe there's a north and a
North and south, yeah.
Jeff, are you still on? Because I mean, Jeff might want to weigh in educationally on that, that question.
I'm sorry, I was walking up the stairs at Humiston when you were cutting in and out a bit.
No, the question that Rebecca asked, you know, are we wedded to having pre-K all in one location like Darcy? I know it doesn't have to be
Yes.
Darcy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the rationale is educationally grounded that we have not only the pre-K, but we also have birth to 3, and we also have special ed, pre-K, gen ed, pre-K with the Smart Start, and kindergarten. Having all of that in one location really supports students making those transitions. And these are the neediest kids that we have in the district in many cases, particularly the birth to 3 population is who I'm speaking of. So, you know, we really kind of need them under one roof. And I have significant reservations about central office being at Darcy. Just it's anything but central, and the facility itself is shaky. I understand renovations and stuff like that, but I hate to put a lot of money into a building that would just be an office building. But that's, you know, just sharing that.
Okay.
Great question, Rebecca. That's no,
Was there
very good
another
question.
part to that question, Rebecca, that we missed?
No, that's a great answer.
This is Sylvia. May I ask a question? Am I unmuted here?
Yep,
Yeah,
can you hear?
Is the I don't remember the number in that birth to 3 and the pre-K thing. It looked to me, if I remember correct, in the 110 kids that you were dealing with at the time. Is that projected to increase significantly, or is that a pretty stable number so that whatever plan we've made in a new building would require a static size to add to the building? That makes sense?
No, that's a good
Is
question.
the average enrollment of that, is the average enrollment of that program in the 100 or 110 students? And is that projected to increase over the 8 years significantly?
So in the projections as we have them now, we're assuming it's relatively static enrollment, but that is a big question mark whether we are moving towards universal pre-K or not in this state.
So that's a consideration.
That is a consideration.
That's it. Just throw a monkey wrench into everything. Why don't we?
I
But-
know, but we're planning ahead here.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more detail to that, right now, Sylvia, we're at about 93 students for pre-K. Pre-K consists of Smart Start, which we have 2 classrooms of that. It's roughly 34 or 36 students. And the rest of the pre-K consists of special ed pre-K and the reverse mainstream program. And then Birth to 3 is primarily an in-home program. Although some of those students come to Darcy for evaluation and other programs, it's primarily a home-based program, so it's not included in that count.
And Vin, how do you determine those 98 students? What is the criteria for them to be in the pre-K program? How do you determine who those students are, and will that change?
Well, the Smart Start is governed by the number of openings that we have. So people have to apply for that program.
Yeah.
So it's based on the number of seats that we have. Again, I don't know if the number is 32 or
Right.
34, but that's the range. And if Jeff is still on, he may have to help me with this. The special ed pre-K is determined by the number of students who are identified that need special education services. And then I believe it's a 1-to-1 reverse mainstream component. So if we have 30 students that are enrolled in special ed pre-K, where you can have 30 reverse mainstream students in the program.
Okay. So those pre-K kids are not necessarily educationally challenged or whatever. They're normal kids who have opted to be part of this Smart Start program if they apply and get accepted.
Well, there's 2 different programs. There's several different programs, actually. One is Birth to 3, as Vince said. That's identified by us, the state. We're like a contractor for the state.
Okay.
We're one of the few school systems that do it, but we do it because it's really beneficial to our kids. So we have folks, the state basically pays for it through Medicare reimbursement, but we provide services to those families, as Vince said, predominantly in the home. Then
Okay.
we have a special education preschool program that's required
Mhm.
by the state. But as Vince said, there's a typical peer component to that.
Right.
So we have that those classrooms as well. We also have totally separate and independent is Smart Start.
Okay.
That's grant funded preschool that we were talking about on the call. I mean, that it may become a situation where preschool is mandatory for kids, but I think the state will have a lot of difficulty doing that because you'd need to just increase so much space statewide. It would be a huge fiscal undertaking. So, but we do have the 2 programs now. That's based on need. There's a sliding scale fee for that. I mean, anybody can enroll, but there's a sliding scale fee to that, and that revenue goes back to the town.
Okay.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll add is, Sylvia, the Smart Start program are regular education students.
Yes, that's what. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Doesn't have to be, but
Oh, okay.
predominantly is.
Okay, thank you.
And just a heads, I apologize. I have a hard stop tonight at 5. I do apologize. So if I have to go, John can take over, and Rebecca, we've already reviewed a lot of stuff. And this other one, Rebecca is, Dodd remain a 7-8, and we do CIP or whatever. Again, possibly, size that elementary school maybe to minimize additions at the other schools. And again, that's tweaking those lines, right? Like it's that, exercise you guys do so well. And then in the future, we could replace Chapman with that, use that as a swing space is what we were thinking. If there was renovations, alterations to other schools, it just gives us some room to flex a little bit, to be determined. And then, with the high school, that's a big dollar value to if there is a renovation to the school, just due to the pure size. Certainly north of, I think, $100 million. Just based upon our experience, we haven't put together a budget, but given a 240,000 square foot building, that's a lot of building to renovate for that. Or CIP, again, it's up to the district and the town, what's going to be required. So again, first pass, first bake at it, and unfortunately, we didn't get to talk with you and Mike, because I know typically we'll work together on these.
Can I ask a quick question? When you talk about renovation, like for the high school, is there a certain amount of gross square footage that has to be renovated and some could be demolished and rebuilt? Do they look at any sort of scenario, like if we maintain portions of the high school, renovated in place, gut rehab those portions, then built new? Like just throwing that out there, like if we kept the Thorpe Auditorium, the gym, the band room in a portion of the school and then built a new classroom wing off of it, does something like that qualify for, or is that like a combination of new and renovation reimbursement from the state?
Yeah, you could do what they call, basically be an addition renovation. What they call, it starts as an addition, an extension alteration. They call it EA, until you get the renovation status. Again, I say this because districts have gotten caught up on it, and I don't want you guys being surprised by the process. But essentially, yes, Andrew, you could do that. We just have to justify it. Looking at, we'd have to talk about, programmatically, why are we doing it? What are the advantages of doing it? It might be physical condition reasons. It might be an area might not be programmed the way you envision the school operating in the future. That would certainly require some study, but it is possible. That is definitely a possibility.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Yeah. And then scenario 2 was, again, that middle school. And there was a 2, and I'll say a 2A here, Rebecca, where, the first one is a new middle school, 6 to 8. But then one of the members' great suggestion was, what if they built a middle school, a 7 and 8 that was smaller, and Dodd became available as an elementary school. So sticking with just this one, 6 to 8, obviously that's a large building. We're asked, based upon the enrollment, we're looking at close to 200,000 square feet for that building. That's a very large building for almost the 1,200 students there. The site would have to be approximately 25 acres, 27 acres, depending on topography, et cetera. Again, repurpose in both scenarios, repurposing that as maybe an elementary school. Now, I think in that one, that really, that part of it would have to look at it from an educational program with the district to see if that will fit your needs. I think the assumption, okay, the building's there, but every building doesn't necessarily operate well as both the middle school and elementary school. And that's where, Ben and Jeff, that's where we would need, I think, to really look at the floor plan, look at the layout, and go, does this really work, for you in these programs? And I think that's some analysis that needs to be really done, and roll up our sleeves and go, can you realistically use this as an elementary school? Does the layout work well for parent drop off? But all those factors that you're aware of. But I wouldn't automatically assume that, it's an easy transfer from middle school down to elementary school for that.
Yeah, I do want to throw one other point out, just so that, the committee members always keep this in mind as we look to repurpose a particular building like Dodd in this case. Some of the limitations are not the building itself. Some of the limitations are the property for Dodd. The driveway, the number of parking spaces is very, very tight, not much in the way of fields. So, that's another consideration that after we get past the capacity and the age of the building and the physical space, we always have to remember, well, what about the other issues that are related to the building?
Yeah, you would need playgrounds. Like, where do we put, actual playgrounds at that point? It's not just fields. Elementary schools require your 2 to 5 playground, and then your 5 to 12 playground. And where is that located? And I know going around the back of that school, the front's tight, you have your courtyard, but the only place that I remember, Vin, was like towards the back.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
mean,
sure.
there's a pretty good size, field off to the rear and side. Really, it's, I guess, the side of the building at Dodd. And then there's a lower level that is also fields. You could make use of that. My only point is that the considerations are not just the building, but it's the property as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's so important. And also, I know Highland's large, but you're looking 800 plus capacity students in Dodd. Does the district want that big of a school? I mean, we're talking 600-700, not that much bigger, but it's still a big school. That's a large elementary school in the state of Connecticut. So, there has to be more consideration. I don't want to oversimplify that proposal. I think it has a lot of studying that needs to be done on a lot of different levels for it.
I think there's a political implication too on a singular elementary school that's not going to serve the full population of students in the district is got to be harder to sell than a building that'll serve every single student in our school system.
Yep. Good point. And,
Right, but we should not see this as an individual project, right? We should see this as a program, and what building enables the program to progress on its different phases. At the end of the day, I think, we should get buy-in from the people on the program. And whatever we choose as the first step, it's, it is what it is.
We just have to make sure the first domino falls in order to knock over the subsequent dominoes.
Mhm.
So that's just all I'm suggesting.
Right.
I mean, with this one here, my concern, and I know we're kind of live here, is 200,000 square foot school. I think you already saw the numbers in your previous studies. We're not far off. It's that 110, 120, 125, depending on the specifics. It's a large nut, and going back to the financial side of things, which is got to be a consideration. Does the town want to tie up that many dollars, that much money, versus you're looking at a 80,000 square foot school, and these days is probably roughly, and again, I'm going off my experience from other districts, probably in that mid 40s, 45 to maybe $60 million range, depending on when we build it and escalation and other factors. But it's much, much less than this. It's half the size. So I think, that level of scale is a large number when you're talking about debt service and what the taxpayers are willing to take on. I don't say it's easier to swallow, but it's less impactful than a $100 million project.
Right.
Does that tie you up on other projects as well? CIP, doing improvements, whether it's to the high school or the other elementary schools, I think that's something we just got to look at, and what's that impact from a financial, not that it's the only driver, but this is be a big project for it. Going, and again, if you go 7 and 8, yeah, you still have Dodd, but I think that's a big one in these new middle school scenarios. I think we really need to study Dodd from an elementary school, just like for everything that Jeff and Ben said, is it really appropriate for an elementary school or you know, with certain functions? Because just the layout within itself, let alone the site, you know, I'm not sure. We'd have to look at that. And then again, in this scenario, you know, we have to figure out again early, what do we do? You know, how do we address the remaining elementary schools, and what does that the moving of the ratios do? And that's where, you know, Rebecca and Michael come into play of, okay, we're moving these around now. How much room does it give us in breathing room in the remaining schools? And is it enough for the future projections? If so, great. Then, you know, then it looks to, okay, what are those physical needs within those programs at each of those? And again, this being a larger value, a larger project, again, when we're talking to the director of finance there, I think it's going to have some impact potentially.
Chuck, just, and I know you can't give me a specific number, but if you could give me an idea, if we are renovating, because I hear Renee's point about making sure that we have enough total project dollars overall that we can accomplish something for everybody in the spectrum. So to renovate or repurpose an elementary school, are we talking $10 million or $20 million? Or, I mean, is there any guesstimate of what it would be?
Yeah.
School will be different, but there's got to be some guesstimate there.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you an example that just passed referendum yesterday. Newington Anna Reynolds, it's John, what, 66,000 square feet?
Right. Yeah, actually about 65,000.
65,000. That budget is $35.5 million.
Okay.
For renovation.
For renovations.
Without a robust site renovation, it was a fairly modest, you know, smaller site cost. But that budget for 65,000 elementary school renovation is $35.5 million. So, you know, if you're depending where that square footage is, if you're, you know, if there's additions, but that hopefully maybe gives you an idea, Sylvia, of you know, kind of dollars you're talking about.
Yeah, because if we have three other elementary schools to renovate and we multiply that times that number, we're in significant dollars as well. So I think we have to look at the whole picture, and yes, we need to look at each one individually, but we do need to look at the whole project. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the really, I think that's going to be, you know, speaking frankly, I think that's going to be a strong driver in your final selection of an option is, you know, everybody needs to be touched by this. You know, all your schools need to, the way I perceive it, you know, have to be improved to a certain extent, you know, and not all of them are going to be exactly equal, but you have to, all your schools have to be improved, you know, in this program. Because if one of them gets left out, you know, that becomes, you know, just fundamentally, you don't want to leave them out, but just from a taxpayer standpoint, they're like, well, wait a minute, these are getting improved. How come my school, for my child's not getting improved, whether it's middle school or an elementary or the high school? You know, there's only so many dollars, and how do we maximize those and balancing it with the programmatic needs and the space needs? Because the space needs are the space needs. No matter what the dollars, you need more space for elementary schools, and that's why we keep stressing that. So, but yeah, hopefully that'll give you an idea there. So, and not every elementary school needs to be quote unquote renovated. Sometimes you can do what they call alterations, where like a Highland's in pretty good shape. And I'm just using that for an example. I'm not saying we wouldn't renovate it, but does that need to have as many needs as maybe, you know, Doolittle or Norton? We have to do a little deeper dive, but sometimes they don't always have to be renovated. Roof replacements, window replacements, maybe some upgrades, mechanical security improvements. It might be more of an a la carte type of approach to some of the facilities versus, you know, renovation is not the only solution.
Okay.
So we have 5 minutes left, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So our next meeting is the 18th with our next big committee meeting is on the 18th. So Chuck, what are you planning to present on the 18th, and how can this subcommittee help you?
So we're planning to meet next week, right?
I'm sorry?
I think we're planning to meet next week.
Right.
Okay. So what I'd like to propose, and you know, I'd like to hear some of your feedback is from some of the feedback from our meeting the other night. It sounds like option 1 and option 2 seem to have some legs from what we were hearing. They seem to be the most logical, but again, that's just from what we're seeing. Again, that physical need in elementary schools is very strong. What I would like to see is start engaging Malone to start looking at, and we have to have off conversation, Jeff and Vin, on the redistricting term a little bit too, just from a political standpoint, by the way. But looking at, if Rebecca, you guys start moving these districts around with a new school in this general area, start working. I think we're at a point where I think it's fair to say that's a good effort to. I think we have a cost per scenario for you guys. I think that's one scenario I think is well worth starting now and not waiting until the 18th, so we can start seeing what those numbers come out at, Renee. That would be one step.
And I'll leave. I'll have Andrew and Sylvia also give their opinion. But here's what I think. I think that, you know, on the 18th, if we start talking about all options, we're not going to have enough time, and it's going to be very complicated. So I'll say for the 18th, let's focus on options 1 and 2. Those are the 2 more solid options. We'll focus on those 2. We'll dissect them. Not trying to overachieve that day will give us the opportunity to really focus on those 2. And I think we opened the conversation saying that the strategy is attack those 2 first, and then we'll review the other 2. Maybe on the other 2, we don't put that much energy and effort on analyzing them, because they're subpar options, right? So I want to start with the 2 main ones, and then the other 2. Now, when we meet next week, I would like to see some sort of timeline of how those options 1 and options 2 develop, as far as, you know, years 3 plus. And again, spend some time on developing that, or how does it look on the tail end. So I think, in my opinion, if we accomplish that for the 18th, we'll be in good shape.
Renee?
No, I think it's a great idea, Renee. If everybody's in agreement of option 1 and 2, I agree. But, you know, again, I'm just thinking of our charge of, hey, we're trying to look at all the options and make sure we don't dismiss anybody's ideas, because there was one of, hey, what about a new high school? Like, well, that's a big dollar figure. If you do that, you're not going to address your elementary schools anytime soon.
I have a
What do
question.
you think, Andrew?
Oh, okay.
Or Sylvia? I'm sorry, I didn't
doesn't
see you in
matter.
the camera, Sylvia. I didn't know.
What I'm concerned about, though, is we haven't really, I don't believe, from a programmatic standpoint, given a choice as to whether we prefer the 6th, 7th, and 8th together in a junior high or in the middle school, or whether is that going to be determined only by the building space needs, or is that a program determination that we need to make that will drive some of the decisions we make?
I would put that in the category of mildly the moving the 6 to 8, you know, beneficial, but not critical.
Okay.
Having pre-K and K together, critical.
Okay.
Instructionally.
Okay.
You know, so it's just where there are things that are wants and needs, that's closer to a want than a need. But if it fits into the overall scheme of things, you know, it would be a good thing to have.
Okay, I just had a feeling that somewhere out there we had thought that we were aiming to put 6 through 8. Maybe that was just an assumption from the prior discussions that stuck in my head. So that's good. That's the answer I wanted to know, was not
Jeff,
critical. Right.
Jeff, have you ever looked at how many in Durg B have 6 through 8 middle schools?
Yeah, we'll send it to the committee.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. I mean, I've always been a 7th and 8th middle school guy. So if I was voting, I'd say 7th and 8th and 6 days in the elementary schools.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
That's just me. I'm only one of 7 on the DOE.
Yeah, I have the data from the Durg, so I'll send it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll ask Arnett to give it to the group.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's 5 o'clock. Or, do we all agree to focus on 1 and 2 for now?
Absolutely.
You good with that, Andrew?
Yep, all set. That's good.
Okay.
That's great. That helps us out to focus a little bit more.
And
And,
here what I will say, Chuck, if you have specific questions that you need to ask us in the interim, let's send them via email to the subcommittee. If we need to meet in between this weekly meeting, we'll find a time. Whatever we can do to keep you going, that's what we're here for. If you have a list of questions that probably helps, so we can just meet quickly and go through them. So.
Yeah, we'll definitely let you know, but we're working those two options, the 1, I'll say 2 and 2A, if you will, and
Yeah.
start putting together, you know, the timeframes and might start just doing high level budgets just to give us a sense, talking about some of the renovation numbers and just don't want to publish them, but kind of have an idea, if you will.
And we do have another meeting next week, Renee, too. So we do have another meeting before the 18th. So
No, I understand that, but I want to offer up that.
No, I appreciate it.
the
Definitely
answers
keeps the
between-
No, that helps.
I want to stop it, so.
ball rolling. So,
Yep.
all right.
Okay, so with that, I'm gonna be calling to adjourn.
I'll
To
move.
adjourn.
Thank
Andrew,
you,
and I-
everybody. We'll talk soon.
All
I
right.
gotta go.
Thank
Alright.
you,
thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
I made the motion, Sylvia seconded.
that's it, whatever.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Sounds
everybody.
unanimous.
I'll see some of you tomorrow night.
Okay.
All right, thanks, good night.
Bye,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Later.